you have a vendor with better cash flow. What does that mean? Well, they can take on more jobs. What does that mean? Well, now you need to onboard less vendors. What does that mean? Now you can create stronger relationships with the vendors that you have. You have less bookkeeping work. You have less confusion. You have, everything just improves. Diego, today we're discussing owner contributions and paying vendors on time, what needs to be done in order to get there. And owner contributions plays a very big role in that. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about it because we experience this issue a lot. We work with multiple property management companies. Some are better at the payment process than others. What do you feel are the determining factors whether or not a company is going to be successful at respecting the net 30 terms?
Well, it goes hand in hand with how often a company is paying per month, right? If they're only paying once a month, that means they're relying heavily on the rent. They're not relying on actually asking the owners for a contribution when it's actually needed. A lot of property management companies don't even realize how much it's affecting their company. You've seen it. There have been companies that until we come in, they're not proactively asking for contributions, and then you have invoices that are massive that you're not going to be able to pay off until you have those funds,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it affects it completely, you
Yes.
know?
So when do we ask contributions? I know everybody knows this, but let's just discuss it. Contributions are asked when one or multiple invoices together exceed the rent amount, right? So let's talk a little bit about the processes that you build around that. How do we approach that, right? So let's say you're in a situation, you're an MC, you're ready to bill. And what is the process? Well, what do you look at?
So the things that you want to look at is number one, is the home occupied or vacant, right? That's going to tell you if there's going to be rent coming in or not. And
Yes.
then what is the cost of the repair or replacement? Is it higher than the rent amount? Is it higher than the deposit? Those are some of the things that you can look at to ensure that you have funds to pay for it. But even going further is actually taking a look at the owner statement, because the owner might have multiple debts on the account. And if you don't check that out, you might be hurting your business by proceeding with a work order thinking that you'll have enough funds to cover it, but the owner has debt from other things. And unfortunately, it's very common for property management companies to actually utilize funds from an owner contribution regarding a maintenance request to pay off something else. And there's no distinguishable line. And you've seen that. How does that affect us when it comes to paying vendors when
Mm,
that happens?
yeah. All right. So you mentioned deposit. You're talking about the NTE, right?
The well, when the home is vacant, the deposit that the owner will get once the home is occupied. A lot
Mm,
of a lot of companies rely on that, but they're not thinking that the property could be vacant for 2 to 3 months, right? And unfortunately, if that's the case, you can't be relying on the vendor being a bank for you and to pay them until the deposit comes in.
so we have the rent, then we have the deposit. That's a pool of money. And then we also have the NTE, the not to exceed amount. So basically, we have three sources of income where money can come from, right?
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about the NTE amount. First of all, let's talk about the sweet spot. It usually is 500, right?
Yes. So that is usually the sweet spot. Why is that so important? A lot of times owners think that they're saving money by reducing the not to exceed amount, but in fact they're actually spending more money because of it. If you have $100 NTE, let's use that for example, and you send out a vendor to do a job, most likely they won't be able to complete that job within the $100, right? So they will send in a quote, and that quote will most likely have two trip fees inside of that estimate, because they're going to take into account the first trip fee, And then they're going to take into account a second trip fee because they're going to need to go back out there. And those are some of the hidden fees. No one really talks about it, but it's there. And so the owner might think, oh, I'm controlling how much it's going to cost me. But in fact, you're actually spending more by doing that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we have a few companies. I mean, the NTEs range from 100 to 500, sometimes 1,000 for emergencies, which is another thing. But anyway, we're not here to discuss this, but the NTE plays a big role in this because it is a source of money that we can pull from, right? Okay. So, when does the NTE get replenished?
Every time you utilize it, the property management should be contacting the owner to replenish that amount that was used. But that's one of the biggest issues that we've seen and that we've come across. Most companies are not proactively asking for that not to exceed amount. They usually replenish that amount once the rent comes in,
Mhm.
right? So everything gets grouped together, and then at the beginning of the month, once the rent comes in, then you basically replenish it from there. But we've seen that that is not helping, pay vendors faster to get better pricing. Because if you just wait for that, and let's say you get another service request, and it's a decent amount, what's going to happen is you're going to need to ask the owner for a contribution. But since that's not happening, it's affecting how often you're paying vendors and how late that's happening.
Mhm. All right. So we can assume or we can conclude that most of the time we're not going to exceed the rent. So there's not necessarily an issue to respect the net 30 terms. Of course, that is on the condition that you pay multiple times per month, right? If you pay once a month and it just passed the deadline, well, now you're going to pay after 45 days or whatever it may be.
I wanted to ask you about specific client, you know who it is. Basically, we've seen how much it affects us, right? We've seen how much it affects the relationship with vendors when you don't pay them on time. What else have you noticed? What does it do with, for example, let's use one of our clients that we've seen that they're not constantly asking for a contribution. What is the outcome of that with Cavalry, the vendor, and the PMC?
Yeah. It's an enormous amount of work. It's crazy. It is draining time, but in a way that you really wouldn't expect it. And it's draining time from everybody. So for example, to give you some context, we are basically an external maintenance department for property management companies. So we work very closely with their team, right? So who is the team? Well, we have billing team on their side. We have the billing team on our side. We have the owners. Then we have the bookkeeper. So on their side, there's the billing team, but there's also the bookkeeper. And then there's us. So literally when we're having issues or when we're trying to get funds or when the funds come in late, we're getting communication from vendors. We need to reach out to the accounting team. Our accounting team is busy. Then there's an issue with it. You and I have to get involved. It takes too long. So the amount of hours that are wasted, and then not to think about the amount of hours that the vendor bookkeeping team also is wasting. It is incredible, incredible. I believe that fixing this because it's probably one of the last things that gets fixed in any company we work with, right? And it's also because we come in with our processes, so but we don't always control bookkeeping, and that's why it is. I think it's one of the biggest wastes of time for such a small little problem, actually, or an easy fix. I really
Exactly.
think it's important.
No, and it's basically that belief of inconveniencing the owner, of
Yeah.
taking the time to actually ask them, hey, Mr. Owner, your account is, it has a negative balance of X amount. We need X amount to replenish the not to exceed amount and to pay off what you owe, right? It's that simple. but you would be surprised by how that is not taking place, how a lot of companies are letting that go and just waiting for the rent so that they're not bothering the owner.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that. Like, let's discuss high ticket items. So, a bill of $1,000, great. We're going to be able to cover it with the rent, right? A make ready, though, different story. Make ready is different because of two reasons: because of the high ticket, but also because the owner may be leaving, right? But then high ticket, let's discuss something we see every single year, which is an HVAC system breaks. What happens? You have two types of companies. You have one that asks for contributions and a company that doesn't ask for contributions. When a property owner working with a property management company knows that they're not going to ask for contributions, what's going to happen is they're going to approve, oh yeah, please go and replace that $7,000 AC unit. Okay, great. They go. After the rent comes in, they're like, oh no, you still owe us $4,000. Can you please send it? And the owner basically just replies, oh yeah, I don't have money. You can take it from the next 2 months of rent. The problem with that, of course, is now as a vendor, you have no power because you don't want to lose their business either, because they're sending you a lot of work. And now you're basically being the bank, interest-free bank. It's crazy. And those property management companies, they would also not accept to pay for late fees.
Yeah.
So I mean, that is really why property management companies have such a bad rep. And we reach out to hundreds of vendors a week. We know we have a very bad reputation with vendors just because of late payments mostly. People don't even care that it's not 30 terms anymore. It's just like, just pay me on time,
Yeah. No, and it definitely affects the relationship that you have with vendors. And you can't see the vendors as a bank source,
Mm,
right? And that's exactly what we do and what we fix right from the beginning. We recommend always asking for those funds before the job even gets started.
yeah.
That avoids those type of issues. It avoids delay of payments. It avoids having multiple discussions with the vendor, because they're going to follow up. They're going to be asking, where's my payment, right? And then you having to contact billing, and then it just a domino effect that if you just nip it in the beginning, it's gonna flow, perfectly fine.
Hmm.
Because you would be surprised by how many companies they accept an owner doing a massive job without even having the funds
Hmm.
available to cover it. And that owner could just go ahead and go MIA. And that has happened, right? And so it's crazy.
Yeah, and then on top of that, vendors often think that they're competing with other vendors, right? Which is true. But what property management companies don't always understand is that they're also competing for the best vendors. So if you pay the fastest, you get the best vendors over time. That's it. If you pay a vendor on time, what's going to happen? First of all, less complaints, all of that. We know that, right? But also, what's going to happen is you have a vendor with better cash flow. What does that mean? Well, they can take on more jobs. What does that mean? Well, now you need to onboard less vendors. What does that mean? Now you can create stronger relationships with the vendors that you have. You have less bookkeeping work. You have less confusion. You have everything just improves. And then same thing on the billing side. Something I would like people to know as well is it is a common misconception that paying multiple times a month or even a week, we pay daily, is causing the bookkeeping department more work. Actually, it's the opposite, because making payments is very automated. Select, tack, 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 you go out. For every payment that is not made on time, you get an individual email that you need to go and investigate, see, reply to, or don't reply and get, a lot of bad emails, right? So it's just this. We need to call it another type of snowball, but it's a type of snowball too.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's a massive issue that can be so easily fixed.
Yeah.
So
All right, cool. Well, let's talk solutions. What processes need to be implemented in order for this to be checked? And I'm just talking high level. Like what is the what needs to happen?
So, very easily. Number one, check the rent amount. Check if the property is occupied or vacant to ensure that you have funds there. Number two, check the not to exceed amount. Make sure that you don't surpass it. If it does surpass that, you need to see if the rent might cover it. Number three, check the owner statement. If the owner statement has a positive balance and it can cover the amount that you're wanting to cover for that maintenance repair, then great, you can go ahead. If it doesn't have enough funds and you see a negative balance and you see that it won't cover that expense, then you need to ask for a contribution. But a very important step when asking for the owner contribution, you need to ask for what is negative on the account, the not to exceed amount to replenish it, and the maintenance repair that you currently have, going on. So that way the account is full and you don't go back into that same issue of, constantly having to go back and forth. So yeah, that's how easy it is. Just taking a look at those particular items and ensuring that the owner actually has funds on file.
All right, cool. Well, I hope this starts a conversation or this opens people's minds that maybe now heavy season is over, guys. Time to improve your processes. So it could be one of them.
100%.
All right. Thanks, Diego. Peace.
Peace.